Hello, welcome. You are listening to Dr. Sushma Singh. Today in Unit 27 Industrialization, let us start our lecture with topic Historical Background of Industrialization Process. In the 18th century, a series of change in society brought about a gradual change in the production process. Powered machines were increasingly used in the production process. These series of changes were most accelerated in 18th century England, and the changes were to have dramatic and far-reaching influence not only for England but for Europe and for the rest of the globe. We are sure you must have heard about the Industrial Revolution when you read history in school and elsewhere. Let us recapitulate what the Industrial Revolution meant and how it spawned a series of changes in society leading to industrialization. The first is Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution may be defined as the application of power-driven machinery to manufacturing. It had its beginning in remote times and is still continuing in some places. In the 18th century, all of Western Europe began to industrialize rapidly, but in England the process was most highly accelerated. England's head start may be attributed to the emergence of a number of stimulus factors. England had large supply of fuel and raw material that it would get from its colonies abroad. There were abundant labor supply to mine coal and iron. The merchants of tea and tobacco had money to invest in technical and scientific innovation, to add on a scientific revolution that were already taking place. Now let us move to the next point, agricultural innovations. England between 1760 and 1830 was also experiencing innovative changes in agricultural techniques. As we already mentioned, there was crop rotation, which did not allow the land to lie fallow, follow each planting. The open field system gave way to enclosed compact farming. Jethro Tull introduced horse hoe and seed drill, and Bakewell pioneered stock breeding. Bakewell showed how to breed for food quality. Bakewell selected his animals, inbred them, kept elaborate genealogical records, and maintained his stock carefully. He was especially successful with sheep, and before the centuries, and his principle of inbreeding was well established. Now the next point is technological changes. The technological changes of 18th century did not appear suddenly. During the 16th and 17th century, the method of making glass, clocks and chemicals advanced markedly. By 1700 in England and by 1715 in France, the tendency of the state and the guilds to resist industrialization was weakening. In fact, popular interest in industrialization resembled the wave of enthusiasm elicited by experimental agriculture. By the beginning of the 18th century in England, the use of machines in the manufacturing was already widespread. In 1762, Matthew Bolt built a factory which employed more than 600 workers and installed a steam engine to supplement power from two large water wheels which ran a variety of lathes and polishing and grinding machines. In 1733, John Kay patented his flying shuttle, and about the same time James Hargreaves came up with the spinning jenny, where one operator could spin many threads. In 1779, Samuel Crompton invented a machine known as Crompton mill, which produced fine, strong yarn. By 1812, the cost of the making cotton yarn had dropped 9/10, and by 1800, the number of workers needed to turn wool into yarn had been reduced by 4/5, and by 1840, the labor cost of making the best woven cloth had fallen by at least half. Now the next point is advances in transportation. The steam engine developed by James Watt in 1773 was a landmark in industrialization. Other innovations and discoveries which propelled industrialization include the production of electricity and the railroads. By 1936, England had built an electric grid completely covering the entire country. Electricity was one of the chief factors which led to rapid industrialization in Russia in 1930s. The railroad were another feature of rising industrial states in 19th and 20th century. British success with steam locomotion, however, was enough to encourage the building of railroads in most European countries, often with British capital, equipment and technicians. Railroads became a standard item of British export. After 1842, France began a railroad system which combined private and public enterprise. The government provided the rail bed and then leased it to a private company which provided the equipment. In Russia, Canada and United States, railways served to link communities separated by vast distances. In Germany, there were no vast empty spaces, but railroads did help to affect political and economic integration. The internal combustion engine used to motor cars completely revolutionized social patterns of mid-20th century. America took to motor cars in a great way. The growth of the automobile industry created large fields for investment, produced new types of service occupations and revolutionized road making. This was true in Western Europe as well as in America after the Second World War. The First World War saw the beginning of commercial aviation. Germany's geographical position and the ban on military aircraft imposed by the peace treaty led to the development of civilian airlines. By 1929, commercial planes were flying out of the Europe capitals to all important places on the globe, and the day was not far off when airplanes were to eclipse railroad trains as commercial passenger carriers. Now the next point is communications. In 1876, transmitted human voice over the phone revolutionizing communications. Although it was just several decades before the telephone became popular, at the end of the century the wireless telegraph became a stand safety device on ocean-going vessels. Radio did not come until 1920. Then it was commercially exploited in America to a much greater extent than in Europe. In Europe, the broadcasting system were either operated or closely controlled by the state and did not carry commercial advertising. The penny post on all letters were inaugurated in Britain in 1840, after it was discovered that handling not the distance sent was the critical cost in delivering mail. All letters weighing a half ounce or less could be carried for an English penny mean 2 cents. By 1875, the Universal Postal Union had been established to facilitate the transmission of mail between foreign countries. In 1871, telegraph cables reached from London to Australia. Messages could be flashed halfway around the globe in a matter of minutes, speeding commercial transactions. The world continued to shrink at a greater rate as new means of transport and communication speeded the pace of life. Now, the next point is changing social patterns. The Industrial Revolution, with its attendant revolutions in the field of agriculture, transportation, and communication, brought in tremendous changes in the society. The consequences of this revolution would irrevocably change human labor, consumption, family structure, social structure, and even the very soul and thoughts of the individuals. As we mentioned earlier, the production process itself changed substantially. Production at specified sites known as factories, which used machines, changed the traditional production and manufacturing process, which was largely family based and guild based. Either families owned their tools and procured the raw material themselves. Many such families moved to cities both in search of work because they were disposed of earlier land because of new acts which permitted lands that had been held in common by tenant farmers to be enclosed into large private farms worked by a much smaller labor force. While this drove peasants off the land, it also increased the agricultural production and increased the urban population of England, since the only place displaced peasants had to go were the cities. The English Parliament, unlike the monarchies of Europe, were firmly under the control of the merchant and capitalist classes. So, the 18th century saw a veritable army of legislation that favored the mercantile and capitalist interests. One of the major offshoots of the Industrial Revolution is the emergence of new bourgeois class and the working class. The new class of industrial workers included all the men, women, and children laboring in the textile mills, pottery works, and mines. Often skilled artisans found themselves degraded to routine process laborers as machines began to mass production the product formerly made by hand. Generally speaking, wages were very low, hours were long, and working conditions unpleasant and dangerous. The industrial workers had helped to pass the Reform Bill of 1832. Another consequence was growth of cities and urban centers which became trading centers as well as new political centers. Until the Industrial Revolution, most of the world's population was rural. However, by the mid-19th century, half of the English people lived in cities, and by the end of the century, the same was true to other European countries. Between 1800 and 1950, most large European cities exhibited spectacular growth. At the beginning of the 19th century, there were scarcely 24 cities in Europe with a population of 1 lakh, but by 1900 there were more than 150 cities of this size. By the mid-20th century, not only Western Europe but many other countries were fast industrializing, replacing old feudal institutions with new ones, whether it was in the economy, social life, or politics. These tremendous changes were felt all over the Europe, and scholars tried to capture these changes and analyze them. In the following section, we will look at some major thinkers and their views on industrialization and industrial capitalist society. Here we want to close this lecture. Thanks for listening.